young Iranian Venom, who is now living in France, has also played it multiple times. Even French number 1 Maxime Lagrave has played the Caro-Kann a few games in the last couple of years. So this opening is an impregnable defense that has been used in World Championship matches by powerful players such as Raul Capablanca, Mikhail Botvinnik, Tigran Petrosyan, and also Anatoly Karpov, who's used it in a lot of candidates in World Championship matches. If you check the history, he's played it many times against Garry Kasparov. So the Caro-Kann enjoys the reputation as one of the most solid openings in response to 1e4. So the idea of the Caro-Kann is that Black prepares to challenge the center by playing d7, d5 quickly next move, challenging control for the light squares, and contrary to the Scandinavian, now Black can recapture with the c-pawn if White ever takes on d5. So Caro-Kann is very solid. I also played it a few games myself with mixed results. And compared to the French defense, Black chooses c6 instead of e6 because in many lines he's still hoping to be able to develop his light squared bishop outside the pawn chain by playing bishop f5 or bishop g4 with a solid position. So in the Caro-Kann there are many replies for White. In this course, I decided to recommend the advanced variation. So this is the line I like the most because this is the most principled reaction to the Caro-Kann. Because White gains space in the center, he pushes this pawn 1 square forward. This pawn has advanced on the 5th rank past the middle of the board. And it ensures White fast development for his pieces and more space to be able to deploy our forces. So I think the reason why openings like the Caro-Kann or the French defense are secondary in terms of popularity compared to 1e5 of course, or 1c5, is compared to the Sicilian and e5 openings. Black allows White to gain a bit of extra space in the opening stage, and this allows us some room to work with. So for that reason, I recommend the advance. It does not necessarily guarantee an advantage against all of Black's possible lines, but nevertheless, I think White's position is easier to play compared to other lines. The other line I was tempted to recommend against the Caro-Kann defense is the exchange variation. With d takes d5, then Black takes with the c-pawn, then White takes bishop d3 to prevent the Black bishop from developing outside the pawn chain. So this line is also very popular. It has been played by many top players, including Magnus Carlsen, Caruana, Kramnik, and Aronian, amongst other notable players. But at the end of the day, after knight c6, c3, knight f6, bishop f4 is the critical line here, and I was thinking for a while to recommend this variation. But after bishop g4, followed by queen c8 defending the pawn on b7, and then after the further continuation bishop h5, this is one of the critical systems against the Caro-Kann defense. Black wants to play bishop g6. Black has a very solid position, although he has to defend precisely because White has some pressure along the e-file, and we have the e5 outpost for ourselves. And this position is also interesting. There have been hundreds of games played here, and White constantly tries to put some pressure and prove that he has a small advantage in the opening. So this is also interesting. This line with bishop f4. The other line with h3 is not very threatening because after Black plays e5, we get this double pawn, or sorry, we get this isolated pawn structure with with an isolated pawn d5, but I think black gets enough activity in return. For instance, after knight f3, black can grab the bishop there. And it seems to me that this position doesn't offer white too much because black has the bishops and white doesn't have much room to work with. The move queen e2 on move 8 is more complex because it does threaten to win a piece with f4. So black has to play queen e7, bishop c2, and then now b6 with the idea of bishop a6. And this has also been played in a number of games, but currently black seems to be doing okay after knight a3 and long castle, and then d4. This concrete line seems to be okay for okay for black. It's still quite tricky because black has to defend accurately. His king is quite vulnerable on the queen side. But I analyzed up to king b7, and it seems that black has enough counterplay here. This position. Although of course it's very tricky, black has to find a few accurate moves. So this line is interesting as well. Black can also find cheto on move 6 by playing g6, with the idea to play bishop f5 one day and try to trade life for bishops. So the advance, the exchange Caro-Kann is an interesting choice against c6, but it's not exactly for me. Doesn't work for my style. So right now I'm recommending the advance, although of course white has other good tries. The main line is knight c3, of course. This is the classical main line. But I think at the moment black is doing alright in the positions after bishop f5. This is the classical system of the Caro-Kann. Knight g3 attacks the bishop, and then after black plays bishop g6, white plays h4 to torment this bishop. After h6, knight f3, white threatens the move knight e5, kicking the bishop one square backwards. But I think at the moment black is doing alright in the main lines arising after knight d7, h5, bishop h7, bishop d3, takes, queen takes d3. Now I think after the move e6, black is doing alright here theoretically at the moment, and black makes a lot of draws in practice. So yeah, knight c3 on the move there is of course very much playable, but I think at the moment e5 poses some more problems for black theoretically. So after e5 now, black has two main moves. The main line is of course bishop f5 in order to develop the bishop outside the pawn chain before closing it with e7, e6, and we'll take a look at this in the next one. The other main continuation is the immediate c5 right away with the idea to create counterplay in the center, and this is the modern main line where there's been a lot of games played here recently in practice and also in correspondence and computer games. But before we take a look at c5, let's also look at queen b6 first. Queen b6 is a very rare and probably second-rate move. However, it does have its ideas. Black puts pressure on the d4 pawn, and in the meantime he keeps the diagonal open for his life square bishop. So black's idea is that after knight f3, he plays bishop g4 and he pins our knight. That being said, I still don't think black equalizes after the simple move bishop e2, covering the pin, e6 castle, knight e7, and now knight bd2, guarding the knight on f3. And next move we can play h3, or alternatively we can play c2, c4 right after. So here white is also slightly better, but I imagine that some Caro-Kann players will be happy to have developed the bishop here while pinning our knight. But nevertheless, I think white is slightly better. So that being said, after queen b6, I recommend instead an interesting move, bishop e2, which seems like a weird move, but the idea is to prevent bishop g4 at the time being by taking control of that square. And the next move, white can play knight f3, because black doesn't have much choices of moves at the moment. So when he plays bishop f5, then now we play knight f3. And since we're gonna go for the setup anyway with knight on f3 and bishop on e2, then we're doing well. After black plays e6, we castle short and then see what black does. If black tries c5, then just c4, breaking the center. And yeah, this is very good for white because the bishop on c1 is still there, protecting the b2 pawn. So black's queen on b6 lacks strength on being there. If black plays knight e7 on move 6, then this is playable. Now we have two options. We can either play a4, threatening a5 to harass the black queen. Black probably should play a5. Now white has a number of good moves. Knight h4 is one good move here, taking advantage of the fact that this bishop doesn't have many retreat squares. And after h6, we grab the bishop pair, takes, c3. This position is very pleasant for white, as long as we can control our center squares here, on d4 and e5. If black plays c5, we have the move g4, kicking away the black knight. The knight has to move. And now after knight a3, with the idea to bring the knight to the outpost on d5, white has a nice space advantage, and we also have the bishop pair. Knight b5 is coming next move to protect d4, so white is much better. So a4 is a good move. c4 is also a good try, with the idea to gain space and harass black's queen further by playing c5. Now if black takes, we don't recapture on c4 right away, but we move our knight here, because we want to be able to recapture with our knight, and then gets the c4 where it attacks the black queen. After knight d5, as you can see, black lost some time moving his queen to b6 and back, and now he's behind development. Knight h4 hunts the bishop down, taking advantage of the fact that the bishop cannot retreat to h7. Black can play bishop e4, but after f3 we just kick the bishop back, and then f4. And now we want to play f5 next move. For example, after queen d8, then g3, f5 is still coming next move. Then now f5 takes. Yeah, and white has some advantage here thanks to the bishop pair and the actively placed pieces. After rook f2, white has the bishop pair and a powerful knight on c4. For example, one game continued knight b6, knight here attacking the b7 square, and then bishop d3, eyeing up possible participation of the white bishop on the king side. Black played queen d7 in the game, but this only helped white gain the tempo by attacking the queen. Now queen d3 provokes weakness on black's king side. After bishop h3, with the idea of bishop h6, the dark squares around black's king is quite vulnerable. And now f6 is under attack. Black played f5, but this he had to resign after bishop takes f5, as the attack is just decisive after takes. And white is winning. So let's take a look at c5 now. So this is won't call it the modern main line, but this has been played in a lot of high-level games and it's quite popular. These are played by black players who want to create immediate forcing action in the center. And here I recommend d takes e5. So we just capture the pawn, and now we're a pawn up, and black has to figure out what's the best way for him to recapture one of these pawns on c5 or e5. So black normally plays e6 here, with the idea to recapture this pawn on c5. But now we get a French advance where white has an extra tempo. Yeah, because black has wasted time playing c6, c5, so he's wasted a tempo. But nevertheless, this is a critical line. If black plays knight c6, now we can actually defend our e5 pawn by playing f4. And f4 is stronger than knight f3 because after knight f3, then black can probably pin our knight with bishop g4. And pin is quite annoying. So after knight c6, we play f4 instead, in order to protect the e5 pawn firmly. And then next move, we want to play bishop e3 to defend the c5 square. Yeah, for example, after f4, black can try recapturing the pawn by playing queen a5. But after c3, his queen is misplaced on c5. And here, amongst other moves, white can actually just play b4 and just grab this pawn. And black doesn't have a way to take advantage of this because after e6, we can play queen b5, gaining a tempo on the black queen by offering a trade when white is a pawn up. So after d takes c5, black should play e6. But now after bishop e3, it's not so easy for black to recapture this pawn on c5. And yeah, in addition, the bishop protects the dark squares on our king side as well. So black can play d4 to regain the pawn. He can try also knight h6 with the idea to play knight f5. But after knight f3, turns out knight f5 is simply met by bishop f2 when black is still unable to regain this pawn at the moment. Meanwhile, if black plays d4 with the idea to recapture this pawn, then we can just take, actually. Takes, followed by c3. And it's up to black that he has enough compensation for the pawn, which I don't think he has, because after castle, queen d2, queen b6, now we have the very accurate move, bishop d3, with the idea to consolidate the position. The idea is that after knight takes, c takes, black cannot take this pawn. As after takes, we have this nice trick, bishop takes h7, with check, and therefore winning this piece on d4. So black cannot take on d4. Meanwhile, if he plays rook d8 with the idea to put pressure, then it turns out after knight a3, the idea of knight c4, the complications work clearly in white's favor. Because for example, after takes knight c4, black has to waste time moving the queen because now we gain a tempo by hitting the enemy queen. So black plays queen b5. This is black's best defense. White has to move knight d6. Yeah, if the queen retreats here, then we can just take on d4, and we're still up a pawn. Meanwhile, queen b5, knight d6 further gains one more tempo, the black queen. Queen c6 is the best defense for black. After bishop e4 and bishop takes, the complications work extremely well for white. And if he takes our bishop, then he's simply down a pawn. So he has to take here in order to regain the pawn, but now our pieces are much more active. For example, castle rook takes, and now queen f2, and white nevertheless remains with a strong initiative because of black's undeveloped pieces on the queen side, and we have some pressure along the d file as well. For example, here if black tries to take a pawn with queen takes a2, this does not work very well, because after bishop e5, then we gain access to the d file, and it turns out if black gives a check, then no problem, we can just block it, bishop b1. And black is up a pawn, but his forces on the queen side are terribly undeveloped. And if he plays rook d7, then after g4 kicking the black knight away, followed by queen h4, white's attack is very powerful. h7 is hanging, e7 is hanging, and knight g6 loses by force because of the knight's check, and black has to close. But after bishop d6, black's rook and on a8 cannot help to the defense of his king, and white is simply winning in this case. So after knight f3, bishop e7 is playable, black just wants to castle kingside. But after knight bd2, the knight is very flexible here. We can play knight b3 in the future to protect c5. And yeah, so the knight is well placed here. Black cannot easily regain the sacrificed pawn. If black plays d4, we can simply retreat our bishop to s2 when we gain access to the e4 square for our knight. And meanwhile, if black plays f6, if black plays f6 now, bishop b5 fights for control over the e5 square. And yeah, if black takes, then we can just recapture with the knight. And so we attack this knight on c6. And if black castles short, then we actually grab that knight takes. Now we play knight b3. Castling short is also a good choice because the bishop can retreat either to d4 or to f2. For instance, if knight f5, bishop f2, or if knight g4, bishop d4. And as long as we keep control over the e5 and c5 squares, we should be doing excellently because we're up a pawn and black's bishops are quite passive. But knight b3 is a good choice as well, just making sure that we keep the c5 pawn under our control. And if black takes, then we take on e5. Black's bishop on c8 is still very passive. For example, after bishop f6 and short castle, bishop a6 and rook f3. And it is clear that black is struggling to find compensation for the pawn, because the bishop on a6 is not exactly doing that much other than controlling the d3 and e2 squares, but it's not really, we can sidestep and ignore that bishop. Takes, rook f3, and white is still a pawn up with nice control over the d4 square. So here, white played rook e1 in the game, but I suggest instead bishop f2 in order to preserve our dark squared bishop. Also keep a close eye on the d4 and h4 squares. For example, if black plays queen g5 and queen here, defending everything and consolidating the pawn, offering a trade of queens, which black should probably decline. Now after knight a5, the pawn on c6 is not so easy to defend, and black doesn't have decisive counterplay on the king side because we control the squares of the possible squares of the black knight. So we play rook e1 next move, and we're pretty much well on the way towards consolidating, because pawn c6 is unpleasantly attacked as well. So on move 6, black can play d4. This is probably his best option. He regains his pawn on c5, but in return he has to surrender the crucial e4 square, which we can use for our knight. For example, if black takes, then knight b2. The knight hurries to get to the e4 square from where it controls g6, etc. For example, Black should probably develop his king's knight now. So he can go to e7 or to h6. If he goes to e7, then we play a3. It's an important little pawn move because it takes away the b4 square from Black's pieces. So now, if we move our knight, Black can no longer play bishop b4 check. So White controls the b4 square, and later we can also consider advancing our b-pawn by playing b4. So let's see what Black can do. If he castles, then bishop d3 is a good move, activating our bishop this way and also blockading the d-pawn, Black's d-pawn from advancing. Now after knight d5, we actually have this nice extra option of queen h5, threatening checkmate. Black plays g6, queen h6, and now his king side is a bit vulnerable. And we have some squares to work with. For example, if Black plays f6, then b4, and the complications work really well in White's favor after takes, followed by b5. Black is currently a pawn up, but we're threatening to capture this knight on c6, and White is clearly better because if Black sacrifices a piece by taking here, then after bc6, I don't think he has enough compensation because his pawns are doubled, and White has firm control over the e4 square, which is all that matters at the moment. And meanwhile, knight a5 leads to a bad position for Black after f takes e5 because we're ready to castle short, and the pawn on d4 is hanging. Black's dark squares on the king side are quite vulnerable as well. So instead of short castle, move 9, Black can play knight d5 right away to threaten knight f4, or also to jump on the e3 square. But we play queen g4, and queen g4 is a very nice multi-purpose move because how else are you going to defend the f4 pawn? If g3, Black has knight e3 probably. So queen g4 is nice because it protects this pawn, which can be quite annoying to protect. And it also gains some time by attacking this pawn on g7. So Black has to defend this pawn, so he should probably castle a short because knight e3 does not work after queen g7, attacking the rook. And this does not work for Black because after check, king d1. If he takes a rook, then we also grab the rook on h8. And here, we grab this rook with check, bishop f8. Now we defend against the mate threat. And after e takes d2, Black's attack is leading nowhere. And after knight g5, with the idea of knight h7, our pieces get there first. So after queen g4, Black should probably castle short to protect pawn on g7. Now after bishop d3, his king side can be quite vulnerable if he doesn't act fast. So bishop d3 is a nice multi-purpose move because it puts pressure on the h7 pawn on the light squares. And also in addition, it protects the pawn on c2. So now if Black jumps knight e3, he's not threatening the pawn on c2. Black can try f5 here to try to close the position. Or alternatively, can play f6 instead, trying to open up the position. But here White keeps control after natural moves, knight gf3, developing the knight and protecting this pawn on e5. So after takes, then we just recapture fe. Black's position looks nice, but we have firm control over the light squares. So we're doing alright. Because Black's bishop on c8 is still very passive, and it's going to take a lot of moves to bring him to the game. Meanwhile, we already castle our king, and now we bring the rook over to the game. The idea of play rook e4, takes, and White has pleasant play. Black has the bishop there, but his light squared bishop, again, is still passive. Pawn on d4 is hanging. Sorry, not knight e5, but knight e4 is a threat in order to take control of the dark squares. And Yeah. For example, after a5, knight comes to e4. And white has number of moves. h4 is a good move with the idea to gain space. There. Now push h5 to take control of the g6 square. And h4 is just a nice multi-purpose move in order to gain space. Black's kingside is quite vulnerable. Push. And after rook e2, with the idea to play bishop h4 next move. Black's king is quite vulnerable. If we can trade the dark squared bishops, which we plan to, then the dark squares here will become quite vulnerable. So on move 11, probably f5 is a stronger move because it at least closes the king side, and we don't really want to take on f6 because after takes, knight takes f6, black attacks our queen, and e5 is coming, so black gains tempi attacking our queen, and this is not really good because the knight also protects the h7 square. So after f5 we should avoid capturing en passant with e takes f6. Here black is okay. But we just retreat our queen, queen g3. And white is not in a rush. We maintain the coordination of our pieces and finish our development. Later we're gonna try to open the king side by attacking this way. So black's problem is he doesn't really have much counterplay because he can play knight e3, but he doesn't really threaten anything because all our pawns are protected. So he does prevent us from castling on either side. But after knight e2, developing our knight and putting pressure on d4, it turns out that knight on e3 is not really a big problem for white because we can always capture that knight. For example, if black plays queen d5, threatening the pawn on g2, then we can take the knight, no problem. And now we're ready to castle. And it turns out our bishop on d3 keeps our position together. Black is doing badly here. If black plays a6, then after knight b3, gaining time attacking the black bishop. And now we can take on e3, it's playable. But it turns out knight bd4 works extremely well for white. Thanks to this sort of tactics. For instance, if black takes, black has no tricks at all. And this merely leaves white up a pawn. Meanwhile, after knight g4, then c3 is a strong move. Just solidifying our d4 square, takes, and white is up a pawn. White is a pawn up, black has no way to create counterplay because his pieces are still quite passive on the queen side. Bishop c2, and now we can castle long or castle short, but probably castle long, and black does not have sufficient compensation for his pawn. So I like queen g3, it's a nice slow move, no rush. Next we just want to develop our knight, our king's knight, either to e2 or to f3. Black can try queen a5 with the idea to use the pin on the a file to threaten knight cb4 probably. But after rook b1, simple move, preventing a piece from jumping because now we can capture it. b5, knight f3. Now we're ready to castle short. Now knight b3 is a threat. Black's position is playable, but white has a slight edge. Thanks to his control over the position, because the pawn on d4 will remain under constant attack after knight b3. And the bishop on d3 keeps everything together by protecting the c2 pawn. So white's position is quite stable. For example, after rook fc1, it turns out there's nothing black can do. The knight on e3 looks nice, sure it does, but black has no threats. Pawn on c2 is well protected. He cannot move his knight on c6 away as after knight b3, the pawn on d4 is falling. So it turns out black has no threats, and the queen on a5 could also become a little bit misplaced later on because she doesn't have any retreat squares to go to, as the bishop on b6 is blocking its way. So we're actually following the game Holbein against Anderson, played in 2018. In that game, black played bishop e8, but after king h2, slowly improving position of the white king, black has no play. He tried knight b5, but after b4, gaining a tempo attacking the black queen, the idea to follow it up with knight b3, and here a4 works. And white has a large advantage as black's pawns are vulnerable, and meanwhile the c2 square is well protected. So an interesting little game. So yeah, knight g7 is definitely playable for black. The idea to put the knight here, and it does force us to play a couple of accurate moves. But I think white is better after e3. Black can also play knight h6 with the idea to bring the knight this way. And again, we play a3 to take control of the b4 square and to take it away from black's pieces. Castle. And now you can play knight e4 first, followed by bishop d3. Or alternatively, you can play bishop d3 right away, which is the best place for the bishop. Black can try f6 to create counterplay, but it's not really enough because after takes, black has to take with the queen, and it turns out knight e4 is good for white. Knight e4, and why is it good for white? Well, we're threatening the queen, and if the queen retreats, then we grab the bishop, and now we have the bishop pair. And after knight f3, a very nice move with the idea to castle as soon as possible. Black can take the pawn, but after castle short, turns out white's threat of b4, followed by b5, and the pressure exerted by our bishop pair more than compensates for the missing pawn, because b4 is a threat followed by b5 to keep the black pieces backwards, and black cannot hang on to his extra pawn later. So here after takes, knight e4, seems like queen takes f4 is playable because our bishop on f2 will be hanging if our knight moves. But we have this very nice move, knight h3, and this is the point of the whole variation. Knight h3 protects the bishop and also attacks the black queen, and it also allows us to castle short. So here, white has too strong an initiative in return for a single pawn. The queen is in danger, the bishop is in danger. And now even after his best defense, bishop e7, knight g5, queen g4, the pawn on h7 is hanging. But bishop e2 is even stronger to hunt the black queen down. Takes, and yeah, in this case, black has an extremely difficult position because he's got worse pawn structure, and his pawns are very vulnerable, h7 and e6. So for that being said, knight c6, f4 is considered to be better for white nowadays. So black wants to play e6 first, with the idea to just recapture the pawn. This is the main line. And compared to knight c6, black plays flexibly. So in some lines, he can also play knight e7, or he can bring the other knight quickly to e7, and in order to jump to f5 or to c6, for example. So this is a more flexible way of playing. But the downside, of course, is that it closes the diagonal for his light squared bishop. So now bishop on c8 will be passive for a long time. And here on move 5, white has many different moves. There is bishop e3 with the idea to guard the pawn. This has been played in a few hundred games. There is also the move knight f3. with the idea to simply develop the pieces with bishop d3 followed by castling short. And the idea is similar, the idea is the same, and they're also both very playable for white. But for this course, I'm recommending the lesser known move. This is the move a3 with similar ideas as knight f3, but in this case, we still keep the option to be able to play queen g4 in many lines, as we shall see later. If black takes, then we play queen g4, and this is the point of playing a3 and move 5. So we take b4 square under our control, and this is important because in many lines later on, we want to be able to have the option of playing the move b2, b4 in order to attack c5. But of course, it's not exactly clear which line gives white the best chances for an advantage. But right now, at the moment, I think a3 is very interesting. So, besides the normal recapture bishop takes c5, which is the main line, let's take a look at other possibilities here. Black can play knight c6 first, attacking the pawn on e5, and hereby forcing us to develop our knight. We play knight f3. We don't want to play f4 anymore, because after bishop takes c5, the bishop exerts a lot of pressure on this diagonal. So after knight c6, we want to play knight f3. And if black takes, then we play b4, gaining a tempi, attacking, or gaining a tempo, gaining a tempo attacking the black bishop. And now the bishop has to figure out whether he wants to retreat here or this way. So after b4, black has a choice. If he plays bishop b6, this seems to be the right retreat, as it keeps an eye over this diagonal. But after bishop b2, b5 is also interesting, with the idea to force the black knight to retreat, and now he has less pressure over the e5 pawn. So b5 is also interesting, but bishop b2 looks more natural. And we just keep a firm protection over the e5 pawn. Next we want to play knight bd2. Now black can develop with knight d7, or alternatively he can play f6 right away, which seems to be the choice of more concrete Caro-Kann players. They just want to play f6 and develop the knight to his most natural square. But after knight bd2 takes, it turns out that we have firm control over the e5 square and on the dark squares. And that's all that matters. As long as we have firm control over the e5 square, then white should be doing alright. For example, knight f6, then now bishop d3. White has nice control over e5, and two bishops are very well placed. If black castles, then we can probably castle short also. Or play knight df3 first in order to keep a close eye over the central dark squares. And now, it doesn't matter what black plays. If he plays knight e4, then short castle protects the pawn on f2. Takes, and yeah, we have the f file covered, we have the f2 square well protected. So this looks like a position here. Queen e2, takes, and we just have to be careful not to take with the rook. If we take with the rook, then pawn on f2 is hanging. So we capture with bishop in order to make sure that f2 is well protected. And this position looks like a position where everything has gone right for white. Because everything's defended, pawn on f2 defended, we have strong pressure on this diagonal, knight on e4 is hanging, so black is clearly worse. Knight f3, black can take, but we can take here, knight e5, and this leads to a concrete position. The problem is we cannot take with the bishop, because after knight g4, black wants to play e6, e5 next move with some very complicated play. But we can take with the knight, and it turns out this position is very good for white. Yeah, because if black takes bishop f2, then after king f2, knight e4 check, then I assume just king e1 would do the trick, and after queen h4, g3, takes, queen h1, king d2. Then black has a couple of pawns for the rook and two pieces, but our knight on e5 and our two bishops are extremely well placed, and the bishop on c8 is very passive, so white is actually doing very well here. So after takes, black can try instead knight e4, and now three of his pieces are attacking the critical square on f2. It might seem like everything's falling apart, but the simple move bishop e4 is very good, because turns out if black takes, we can just sidestep with the king e2, and our position is very safe. Meanwhile, black is down a piece, and so yeah, black is a piece down here. And so it turns out he doesn't really have any tricks, because we are ready to castle short, and black still has to recapture this bishop. So after de, queen d8, bishop d8, black's e-pawns are doubled, and the knight on e5 is in an extremely dominating position. So after c4, even after black's best defense here, white gets a better endgame, because the double e-pawns are permanent weakness. Castle, rook d7, and here white has a much better endgame, because bishop e5 is coming as well, and it's very hard for black to hold this position. So yeah, move 11 after bishop d3, now we're ready to castle short, and keep an eye on f2 and e5. Black can try a5, the idea to attack this pawn. But after castle, now we advance with b5, takes, and black has provoked a weakening on the queen side, but white is still better because the outpost on e5 is secure. For example, if black plays knight d7 here, then white has the response queen h5, and black's king side is very vulnerable. Meanwhile, as black plays bishop d7, then a4 is a good, nice consolidating move, making sure, just gaining space and preventing black from advancing his a-pawn further. And what it does is it ensures that in the endgame, our pawn duo on a4 and b5 are well protected. They're protecting each other. So after rook c8, c4, we get this typical Caro-Kann position where white is a little bit better. Black has small pawn islands. The pawn on e6 is isolated and blockaded. Okay, it's not, pawn e6 is not isolated, but it's backward, and it's blockaded by our bishop. So black's position is playable because he has an active bishop on b6, but at the same time, he doesn't have complete equality yet. Yeah, in addition, black cannot play bishop h5 because of bishop takes f6 when his bishop on h5 is hanging. So black doesn't have active counterplay. He can try queen e7, but after c4, again, a4, making sure all our queenside pawns are protected. So this pawn on a4 protects b5, and also on a4, the pawn is safer as it is not under attack by the black queen in the future. So after rook c8, rook c1, black can play bishop e8 with the idea to activate this bishop along this diagonal. And the position is quite complex. White is a bit better, but you have to be accurate. I suggest now the move king h1, unpinning the f2 pawn and preparing later. Maybe you want to play f4 to secure the dark squares. Black can try knight d7, forcing our bishop to retreat. But after bishop g3, our king side is well protected. And now after knight c5, or after bishop f7, then rook e1. And the pawn on a4 is well protected. And in addition, our two bishops are control a lot of squares. So white is still worse. I mean, black is still worse. Their bishop e5. And white maintains a small but useful advantage thanks to the better pawn structure and the pin along the g1, a7 diagonal. So after bishop g3, knight c5, c takes d5, we make use of the pin along the c file. So now, he cannot take our bishop on d3. Because after takes, his knight is pinned along the c file. And white is able to, we are able to trade off black's pesky knight here on c5. So after bishop takes, white has a small advantage because the d5 pawn is isolated and the bishop on d3 is well placed. h3, just creating a loft, an emergency exit for our king. Later, takes. And we're following the game Pekin against Dard, played in 2018. And white has a small but useful advantage because black's pawn d5 is isolated, the pawn on h7 is a target. Meanwhile, our position is very compact, we got no weaknesses, all our pawns are well defended, and the bishop on d3 is active, so white is a little bit better here. Yeah, going back on move 8. Instead of the active f6, black can also develop with knight e7 with the idea to castle short. Now knight bd2. Now black has a choice, he can castle short. Alternatively, if he plays knight g6 to attack the pawn. This actually runs under the fast attack h4 with the idea to play h5 and attack the black knight, kicking the enemy knight away from g6. So as long as we keep close control over the e5 square, then we should be doing fine. Because with bishop c7, we can always respond with queen e2, and h5 is still a threat to harass the black knight. If black plays h5, then after g3, we take control of over the dark squares on the queen side, and we prevent the black knight from jumping to f4. And here black's pieces are awkwardly placed. The pawn on e5 is well protected, and meanwhile black cannot castle short, because if he castles short, there's a move knight g5. When queen takes h5 is a deadly threat. So in the meantime, black's king is stuck on the center, and we are ready to play c4 in the near future. And the most important factor in the exchange Caro-Kann is to keep the e5 square firmly under control, which in this case we're defending it with 3 pieces. Black has no way to capture it. Now the immediate 0-0 runs into bishop d3. And now in many lines we get this Greek gift sacrifice of takes followed by knight g5, which could turn out to be pretty dangerous very quickly. For example, it's a5, then probably bishop takes h7 followed by knight g5. With the idea of queen h5, this looks very dangerous for black. For example, after here, queen g4, and then the black king runs under serious attack. So black plays knight g6 to try to cover up this diagonal, and yeah, later he also gets knight f4 ideas. Then we play b5, and this move is very strong at the right moment because it forces the black knight to move, which means one less attacker on the pawn on e5. Now after knight a5, g3, we cover the f4 square. And so next move we want to play queen e2 without having to worry about possible knight jumps. For example, if black plays f6, then short castle, and then queen e2, keeping the e5 pawn protected, a4, and here white has a small but clear advantage because we have stable control over the e5 square, and in addition we are ready to open up a second front by playing c4 in the near future. So black's main problem here is his bishop on d7. The bishop on d7 is very passive. He cannot join the game. He's blocked by his own pawns, and he's also blocked by our pawn on b5. So yeah, this is the reason why black is worse. If his bishop could be activated this diagonal, then he could create counterplay, but it's not so easy to do so. So black plays bishop c5. After queen e2, white keeps an eye on the center squares, and we are getting ready to either play a4 to support the b5 pawn, or alternatively we can play h4, h5, hitting the enemy knight on g6. And this knight on g6 is the piece that holds everything on the king side together. So if we can kick it with h5, then we could win the game quite quickly. h5. Now after knight e7, black's king side is very vulnerable. And in the game, the game that we're following, actually, white played rook h3, with the idea to attack on the king side later with g4. And meanwhile, our rook defends the squares on the third rank. So very deep move, this rook h3. But white's idea is to castle long and try to give checkmate on the king side. Because yeah, g4 and the pawn on h7 is very vulnerable. Again, black played h6. But now g4, or knight b4 first, followed by attacking with g4. This looks very dangerous for black. White can also play g4 right away, with the idea to threaten g5. The game black played knight c4, and this is more or less forced in order to create counterplay on the queen side. After takes, bishop takes, black sacrifice a pawn. But he did open up the diagonal for his bishop. After rook a d8, white can take on d8, followed by knight d2. In the game he played knight d2, and this is also very good. After rook d3, takes, white is up a pawn, and turns out after knight d5, we can block the attack with knight c4. And now queen e4 is a threat, and black has some problems to solve here. For example, in the game, play knight f4, takes, but our knight on c4 is well placed, and we are ready to jump with knight d6. So the game continued f6, and black has some compensation for the pawn, but it is clear that he has to play very accurately in order not to run under any trouble, because the knight on d6 is very well placed, and we have ideas to push our g-pawn further. So this line is certainly interesting, but I would say that the position after h4 looks extremely dangerous for black, as the pawn on h7 is under tremendous amount of pressure. We have knight g5 ideas also, or h5. Yeah. So going back on move 7, after b4, black can instead retreat to e7. And the idea of retreating here is he wants to play f6 next move, and meanwhile his bishop keeps close eye on the squares on this diagonal. Bishop b2 is playable here, or b5 is playable, kicking the black knight away and easing up the pressure on e5. So now the knight has to retreat. If he goes to a5, then after bishop d3, followed by queen e2, then we get strong play and powerful control over the e5 square. So he goes here with the idea of play knight d7, but then black gets behind in development because he moved his c-pawn twice, and now he moved his knight twice. So after bishop d3, white has a lead in development. For example, if black plays a6, we can even just take and castle. Black plays knight c5, but after knight c3, he doesn't solve all his problems because white has more space and control over the center. Meanwhile, black's bishop on c8 is still very passive. For example, after bishop d7, then just a4, taking control of the light squares here on the queen side. Black plays h5 to push to gain some space on the king side. Then knight d4 and rook e1. And the black's dark squares on the king side are very vulnerable, and his king remains stuck in the center at the moment. So after knight cb5, we have some pressure thanks to our central control and outpost on d4. If black plays knight f5, then after takes, check. Black's king on e8 is very vulnerable. If he gives up his dark squared bishop, then our bishop on c1 will become exceedingly strong. Meanwhile, if he plays king f8, I prefer white here in this position thanks to the much safer king. Although of course still have to play very accurately. But c2, c4 is coming, and black's king is quite vulnerable. So move 13, black can play knight h6 instead, with the idea to castle. And here I suggest an interesting move, which is bishop takes h6, followed by knight e2, with the idea to bring the knight closer over to the king side. And black can take his pawn on a4, but then his king side runs under attack after queen d2. So in the game, after castle, queen d2, black's king side is quite vulnerable, and we're bringing our knights closer over there. And here white has a stable advantage thanks to the weakness of black's king side pawns. h4 is coming, then queen g4 is coming, and black runs under attack. So move 9, a6 is an interesting option, and need to pay attention to this move. Knight d7, with the idea to bring the knight here. This looks quite slow because black has moved his knight already 5 times in the game, or 4 times in the last 10 moves, and this seems to be a tremendous amount of moves. So after a4, just solidifying our pawns, followed by knight bd2. This seems to lead to a better position for white because the e5 square is under our control, and we have a space advantage as well. So we've analyzed knight c6. Let's take a look now at the move knight d7, which is a tricky and interesting move. So knight d7, the idea is to attack both these pawns on e5 and c5. We can actually play b4 here, protecting the c5 pawn and preparing to play bishop b2 next. For example, after a5 we have bishop b2. So black has to take this pawn on e5 before we protect it. But after take bishop b2, b4 is a strong move here because we gain tempi attacking the black knight. So black regains his pawn, but now he has to waste time retreating the knight. So black has lost much time moving his knight back and forth. And after knight f3, now we have a lead in development. Our bishop on b2 is well placed, and in addition we are ready to open up the center by playing c4. For example, after knight f6, c4, white breaks up the enemy central pawn chain and softens up this d5 and e6, and we try to open up the d file. So black should probably play a5 to try to create counterplay on our pawns. But after b5, we gain time attacking the black knight, and this costs black a lot of time. Now after bishop d4 followed by knight c3, it turns out that the concrete play is clearly in white's favor, because knight c3 is coming, and if knight bd7, c6 is very good for white. Takes. Black might have currently the better pawn structure, but we have a strong initiative in return. For example, after knight c5 takes, with the idea to play bishop b5 next move, the complications are clearly in white's favor, because the pawn on c6 is very active and it's going to be hard for black to get rid of it. So after bishop d4, black can turn knight e4 with the idea to capture the pawn on c5, but after knight c3, very nice move. By the way, knight c3 is nice because it maintains our lead in development. So after takes, black cannot capture on c5, as after he takes on c5, g7 is actually hanging. So bishop g7 and white is better. So after knight c3, nice move, takes, black is behind in development. And he can play knight d7, but again c6, and the pawn on c6 is very powerful. It hampers black's development. And now bishop e2. And it is not so simple for black to finish his development, because the pawn on g7 is hanging if he moves his bishop. And yeah, white has a powerful initiative because pawn on c6 is very strong, and the bishop on c8 is still passive at the moment. So knight d7 is an interesting option, but probably not very good for black. Alternatively, a5 here is a poor move, because a5 gives away the b5 outpost for no reason, and we gladly take that outpost. So now our knight controls the squares, and if takes, then queen g4, and black is faced with the question of how to defend his pawn on g7, king f8, bishop d3. And this position is clearly better for white, because we already have developed a lot of our pieces. We already have 4 pieces developed, meanwhile black only has 2 pieces developed. And the king on s8 is not exactly well placed. So white has a free hand in the center. And after rook e1, we maintain nice control over the e5 square, and black is unable to equalize after queen g4, bishop g5, and our pieces are very active. If black tries to create counterplay with queen b6, then it turns out just rook f1 is good. And white is much better, knight a4 is a threat, and queen takes b2 loses a piece due to knight a4. And black loses a piece. So going back on move 5, bishop takes c5 is the main line for black here. Just regaining the pawn and waiting to see what white wants to do. So after bishop takes c5, my suggestion in this course is playing queen g4. And this is the point of playing a here on move 5, because we delayed the development of our king's knight. Therefore, we get options to play queen g4, attacking the pawn on g7. This move is not very common at all, but I believe it deserves a try. On move 6, instead of queen g4, knight f3 is more common. And this is also playable, just developing the knight. This also looks quite attractive, but after f6, I couldn't exactly find a clear way for an advantage for white. So f6 creates immediate counterplay on the e5 square, and after b4, the bishop retreats, takes, and then the good reason for black in this line is by playing f6, he's able to develop his king's knight to the best square on f6, and he's able to castle quickly. After bishop b2, I think white has a small advantage. I believe this has been played in a few games. After bishop b2, black normally plays knight bd7 with the idea to trade our knight, and after takes, queen takes. I believe white is a little bit better here also, so yeah, I suggest interested readers to also investigate knight f3 further if they want to expand their repertoire. It's also a good move. Knight f3 with the idea to advance later with b4. But right now I'll focus on the move queen g4, which looks more active because we threaten the pawn on g7 and we develop the queen outside. We develop the queen actively. So after queen g4, black's best move is knight e7, just sacrificing the pawn in return for activity. Because if he tries to defend the pawn, let's say if he plays g6, then after knight f3, he's behind in development and his dark squares are quite vulnerable on the king side. So after knight c6, then we play knight c3, developing our pieces very actively. And now black should probably play f6 to challenge our control over the e5 square. But after takes, and queen h4, turns out bishop g5 is a serious threat here, which cannot really be ignored. Because after castle, bishop g5, pinning the black knight, black has to play bishop e7 to unpin the knight. After bishop d3, we are ready to castle long or to castle short, depending on what black does. And after knight h5, we capture, we trade everything, and castle. And it turns out in the endgame, white has a small but pleasant advantage, thanks to our control over the e5 and d4 squares. So, we're ready to play knight e5 next move, or alternatively we can play knight e2. And as long as we have nice control over these squares, then we should be doing well. For example, after knight c6, we can play bishop b5 to attack the black knight. And white is slightly better in the endgame. On move 6, king f8 here doesn't make much sense, as on f8 the king is generally badly placed, and black wants to avoid playing king f8 unless he really has to. So after knight f3, knight c6, b4, king on f8 is badly placed, and it's actually been played in the game Beveridge against Loro, played in 2018. And after b5, white has total control over the position, the e5 square is well protected, and we are ready to castle short. So black is unable to equalize in this case. So let's go back now to the main move, which is knight e7. So after knight e7, I suggest the continuation knight f3 to develop. Because it turns out that taking the pawn on g7 is poison. So the problem after queen g7 is black has this fantastic move knight g6. And so that's why we couldn't take the pawn. Because after knight g6, the queen on g7's retreat square is trapped. Or the queen on g7 is quite trapped. Her retreat square or retreat file towards g3 is blocked. And black has counterplay over the e5 pawn. For example, after bishop d3, black plays bishop f8, attacking our queen. And then he plays bishop e7. And if white retreats, then black takes the pawn. And meanwhile, as queen g7, black repeats moves with bishop f8. And therefore, this is only good enough for a draw. So queen g7 is not recommended, as after knight g6, black is doing alright. However, you may start on move 7 first by playing bishop d3. With the idea to play knight f3 next move. And this is also very useful for white. So you can start with bishop d3 first, or knight f3. It should just transpose, because after bishop d3, if black castles short, then after knight f3 we transpose back to the main line. And but knight f3 is a good move because it develops the knight and it protects the central dark squares here on e5 and on d4. So let's see what black does. Here on move 7, he's got a tremendous amount of moves. This position has been played in a handful of games. And the main line for black is short castle to try to place his king on safe position, to defend his pawn, and to play f5 next move. But besides short castle, we should also take a look at black's other possibilities. The other critical replies for black here is knight c6 to develop the knight, or alternatively queen b6 is also very sharp and also a critical option for black. It leads to interesting positions. But short castle is the main line. Let's start by taking a look at queen c7. So queen c7 puts pressure on the e5 pawn, but here white can continue by playing b4, kicking the enemy bishop away and gaining more space. So after bishop b6, bishop d3, we protect the pawn on c2 and we also activate our bishop. So after knight g6, bishop d2, now the pawn on e5 is solidly defended and black is hard pressed due to its lack of space. So for example, after castle, knight bd2, knight c6 attacks our pawn, but after queen g3, white is ready to play the move h4, h5 next, starting a kingside attack, and black is unable to equalize. So now let's take a look at knight f5. On move 7, knight f5 is not very appealing for black here because it does protect the g7 pawn. But other than that, the knight is not putting pressure on e5. And after bishop d3, this knight on f5 becomes a target by our bishop. So, one game black played h5. After queen f4, black doesn't have any counterplay because we have the e5 square and the g5 square firmly under our control. And after knight e7 castle, it turns out that black doesn't have enough counterplay here because black has wasted a lot of time moving his knights back and forth, and the knight on f5 is not exactly doing anything critical. I mean, it does control some squares, but after queen d2, the most important thing is that we have the e5 square under control. And after knight h4 takes, queen takes, we have the nice move knight b5, threatening fork on c7. And after b4, followed by bishop b2. To be honest, I don't understand what black's play is about because his pieces are misplaced here, and white keeps a stable initiative in this position. But on move 7, queen b6 here is a critical move, and it forces both sides to play accurately and very concretely. So if you don't like having to face queen b6, then you can start with bishop d3 on move 7 before playing knight f3. Because now if black plays queen b6, then you can just defend f2 by playing queen g3 without having to worry about knight f5, because now our bishop can just chop it off. So if you don't want to meet queen b6 on move 7, then you can start with bishop d3, and here this works well for white. But after knight f3, queen b6, the pawn on f2 is hanging, and we need to know what we're doing, because we cannot actually play queen g3, as after knight f5, our queen is attacked, and we lose the f2 pawn. But bishop d3 is a very strong move here, just ignoring the threat to f2 and preparing to castle short. So black takes, meaning he has to take the pawn. But now after king e2, it turns out in return for the pawn, we get a strong lead in development. Rook f1 is coming. Then the bishop has to retreat, so black loses time. The pawn g7 is hanging. So yeah, black has to defend very precisely if he wants to survive after king e2. And in fact, the best move for black here, and perhaps the only one also, is a5. So this is what the computers are proudly recommending, and the lines become really concrete. So black, the idea of a5 is to be able to prevent b2, b4 in the future once his bishop gets to c5. Yeah, the lines become really concrete here, but before we delve deeply into a5, let's take a look at knight c6, which doesn't work well after rook f1, because now his bishop is black's retreat squares. If he goes here, then b4 hunts the bishop down, then if he goes here, then c3, or alternatively if he plays bishop d4 right away, then c3 attacks the bishop. And black has some problems here, because if he takes upon e5, then it turns out after takes, queen g7, then black's pieces are under attack. Both e5 and h8 is under attack. We also have pressure on f7, so this is actually very bad for black. So that's why he plays a5 on move 9, because here now the bishop is trapped. After c3, black has concrete problems. Sample takes, queen d4, knight d3. Now we cannot trade queens because black captures the bishop with check. So we have to take here, and black only has 2 pawns for the piece, so I don't think he has enough compensation. Bishop d7 threatens to skewer our family with bishop b5, but fortunately we have a4 to prevent the skewer, and rook e1, and white has to play accurately in the next few moves to consolidate, but I think he can do so. Bishop e3 and king f1, bishop f2 using the pin along the e-file, queen d1, and king g1, and white is well on the way towards consolidating and converting the extra piece. So black has 2 pawns, but at the same time he has no concrete threats, and knight bd2 is coming next move. So on move 10 after rook f1, black can play bishop c5 first, but after b4, the bishop is under attack, and if he moves here, then c3, and again if he takes on e5 with the bishop, then after knight e5, both the rook on h8 and the knight on e5 is attacked. And again, if he takes here, then same old story. Again, we cannot take on b6 as black captures on c1 with check. And we're down 2 pawns, but we just captured knight. And I mean, black has some compensation for the piece with its 2 connected passers, or 2 connected center pawns, but I don't think it's enough. So after castle, black has 2 pawns for the piece, so we need to be careful in consolidating. But I believe bishop e3 fold by king f2, with the idea to hide the king. And e5 threatening to fork our pieces, we just retreat 1 square. And I think black doesn't have enough. For example, b6, then a4 to develop the knight, king g1, and yeah, knight a3, threatening knight b5. White has developed its forces in a way, and we're consolidating and putting pressure on the enemy queenside pawns. So white's chances are preferable, but we also have to watch out for possible pawn breaks in the center. Yeah. But let's now take a look at a5. So the idea of a5 is now after rook f1, bishop c5. We can no longer hunt the bishop down by playing b4. So the position becomes concrete. And in fact, after bishop c5, knight c3 is an option here on move 11. So knight c3 is also a critical line. The idea is to grab the bishop pair by playing knight a4. So black has to play the only move bishop d7 to protect the a4 square. And I also analyzed this. It also leads to fascinating and complex positions, and I recommend or I encourage you to analyze it a bit deeper if you want to. After takes, queen f6 is a very interesting move, keeping an eye on the f7 square. So after takes, king d1, black has to play only move knight a6, because if he develops here on c6, then knight a4 could be very unpleasant. So he plays knight a6 in order to keep an eye on this a4 square, and he wants to castle. After knight e1, rook g8, takes, castle. We get this very complex line where it seems black is holding, but at the same time he has to find like a few only moves in this line, which I think is very hard to do in practice, unless black is extremely well prepared to the teeth. After bishop c5, knight c3 is interesting here. My main recommendation is queen takes g7, so we have to grab this pawn. Rook g8 and takes on h7. So now we're a pawn up. Black can grab this pawn on g2, but after king d1, our king is quite safe here, and meanwhile the pawn on f7 is under severe pressure thanks to knight g5 ideas. So after queen h7, black is best advised to play bishop d7, and now I recommend knight c3. After all, we need to develop our knight. Knight g5 leads to very unclear positions after knight bc6, which is a very good move, by the way. The idea of black is he just wants to run with his king, and white is 2 pawns up, but we have to be careful because black has finished the development of all his pieces, and this is not clear at all. Or alternatively, if you take here on the pawn, preventing black from castling long. Then after check, followed by knight bf5, I couldn't find any advantage for white here, and the position is extremely complicated with chances for both sides. But yeah, black has to play bishop d7 here to take control of the squares. And after knight c3, the only move for black here is knight a6. Black is getting ready to castle long and evacuate his king. I mean, white is a pawn up, and we can try to consolidate it, but it's very murky. I must mention here knight bc6 is not very good. That's after knight a4. We gain a tempo on the black queen, and we also win the bishop pair by grabbing the bishop on c5, which greatly eases the defense. So black has to play knight a6 in order to keep an eye on the a4 square. Now I recommend bishop g5, blocking off closing the g file and also putting pressure on this diagonal. So black castles long, evacuating his king. Queen takes b2 does not work here, as after rook a b1, black wins material, but his queen is trapped. Queen cannot retreat anywhere. So black loses by force. Alternatively, if he grabs the pawn, then the queen is still trapped. So fortunately, yeah, that doesn't work, but as you can see, the variations are extremely concrete. So black castles short. Black castles long, with the idea to harass our queen, and now I suggest queen h3. Retreating the queen, again, because black was threatening rook h8. So we retreat the queen, and at the same time we protect the g2 pawn. And again, queen b2 loses due to rook a b1, followed by the same queen trap. Takes, and black doesn't have sufficient compensation for the queen. So yeah, this line again is very concrete. Black has to defend extremely precisely, but you also need to know what you should do. I think white can try to consolidate on this position. For instance, rook h8 leads nowhere after queen g4. As in many lines, we can support the barricade on the g-file by playing h4. If bishop c6, then rook b1, just keeping control of the b-file. Queen c7. And this position, white is better, but the position remains complex. But I definitely prefer white because the knight on a6 is passive, and b4 can always be met by the move knight e4 when our knight on e4 becomes very active. So on move 15, black plays king b8 to try to put his king on a safer square, just away from danger. Rook a b1, protecting the b pawn, and now in many lines we are threatening to play b4 to try to open up the b-file, but not now, but in the future. Black can play rook c8 to try to create pressure on the c-file. I analyze here g4, taking away the f5 square from black's pieces, and now we just want to slowly consolidate by playing queen g3 followed by h4. This might seem like a slow plan, but black doesn't have any decisive threats yet. So after here, queen g3, next move we play h4 to support the bishop on g5. And this position is very complex. Black has some compensation for his pawn thanks to our vulnerable king in the center. And both sides have chances, but I like white's extra pawn at the moment. We have some pressure on f7 also. Black can play queen c7 here, threatening rook takes g5. So we play queen h4, defending against the threat of rook takes g5. Black plays rook e8 to defend the knight, and king d2, sidestepping the king away from possible dangers along the e-file. So yeah, the king is a bit safer on d2 than on e2. Knight g6, and now queen e1. And again, the game is complex, but white is consolidating. The queen is well placed here, protects the e5 pawn. And next move, we just want to play h4 to close up the g-file and protect the bishop on g5. For example, bishop b6. h4 is an important move because it protects the bishop and it keeps the g-file close. So knight c5, queen e2, and this stabilizes the center, making sure that everything's well protected. Takes, and white is better and on the way to consolidating because the bishop on g5 is well protected, the pawn on e5 is well protected as well. On move 19, after queen e1, black can play rook c8 with the idea to put pressure on the c-file. But after h4, now the position becomes a bit easier to play for white because the bishop on g5 is well protected. And if black takes on a3 with the idea to capture the knight on c3 with check, white does the move bishop takes a6, and black actually loses a piece because of course if take, then we have a useful check on the b-file. So black has to play bishop a7, the idea to bring the knight to the game. But after queen e2, followed by rook d1, black is still a pawn down, keep in mind, and I don't think he has enough threats. For example, if d4, we just move the knight here, and yeah, if black takes on d3, we can take with the queen. Meanwhile, if black takes on e4, then white has a large advantage. Yeah, so queen b6 is a complex move on move 7, but I think it's quite difficult to play for black. Main for both sides, but mostly for black. So on move 7, knight b6 is a very playable move. And after b4, black plays bishop b6. So if we take the pawn on g7 now, Then black hopes to play for compensation by playing rook g8. And this has been played in a game actually. After queen h7, queen c7, black just wants to create fast counterplay by playing bishop d7, followed by long castle. And this position is quite murky. So after knight c6, we play d4, gaining a tempo attacking the black bishop. And now instead of taking on g7, I suggest instead bishop d3. With the idea to just finish our development. For instance here, castle short is actually very bad, because with the knight on f3 and bishop on d3, then the Greek gives sacrifice always works. Almost always, but the Greek gives sacrifices when white sacrifices the bishop on h7, and after takes, he gives a check here or queen h5 first. And black has no way to defend against the attack. For example, it's here, check, queen h8, check, and white wins tons of material because black cannot cover with his pawn, as queen g7 would be checkmate. So black has to be careful castling in this case. He always has to watch out for bishop takes h7 sacrificial ideas with the knight on f3. So generally prefers to play knight g6 first to close the diagonal, and after and then we play bishop b2. Short castle is also very playable here, and this has been played in a game. If black plays h5, then we just retreat one square, no problem. And of course black cannot take on e5, as after takes, both his rook and his knight is hanging with check. So short castle is possible. Bishop b2 first is also possible in order to protect the e5 pawn. Black can play h5 to try to gain space on the king side. Knight c7 is also playable, but now we have firm control over the e5 square. And actually I like here the move h4 with the idea to kick the black knight away. And after h5, we can just retreat here or advance queen g5. It's an important move because it pins the black knight and it takes control of the dark squares on the king side and the center. Bishop, knight c3, developing our knight. And now we should play energetically. So we play knight b5, threatening knight d6. So black has to take on b5. But now we take with check. And so if black takes king f8, he loses castling rights. And now the two bishop advantage secures for white a stable advantage. Pawn on e5 is well protected. And we have pressure on g6. So white is definitely better in this case. Move 10, black can play h5, but then we just retreat to queen. And if black attacks our queen, then we just move it back, queen g4. On move 11, black can play knight ce7 with the idea to support g6 and harass our queen by playing knight f5. So this is actually a serious alternative. Because if we ignore the threat, then black gets counterplay. He gets the bishop there, then he gets some counterplay. Thanks to the lack of squares for our queen. So after knight c7, I believe it's important to meet it with the move queen g5. Which is not a bad move, a nice move actually. It pins the knight. If black plays knight f5, we can trade queens. And keeps an eye on the e5 square. So here we can trade queens. And white is able to get the endgame under favorable circumstances. Because after knight c3, pawn d5 is weak and we are ready to castle long. For example, a5, castle. Now we can win a pawn, but I believe knight b5 is even stronger, installing the knight on d6, from which it controls a lot of squares. this nice octopus knight on b6, bishop b6, and this ending looks very sad for black because bishop on c8 is extremely passive, blocked by its own pawns. And now we get an endgame with a good knight on d6 versus a bad bishop on c8. So black is doing poorly in this case. Meanwhile, after h5 queen g3, if black attacks our queen, then we just move it back, no problem. We get the same position with the pawn on h4 instead of the pawn on h7. But it's not really doing anything for black because the knight on g6 is still hanging and we have the e5 square firmly under our control. So black has to go here to defend the knight. And now I like the maneuver knight c3. Well, first of all, we're threatening knight b5. So black has to play probably bishop d7. But secondly, the idea is to bring the knight to e2 from where it controls both the d4 and also the f4 squares. So these central dark squares are very important in the advanced Caro-Kann. So as long as we have control over the d4, the e5, or the f4 squares, should be doing alright. For example, knight f5, knight e2, our knight protects these squares, bishop d7. Now white has a stable advantage in my view because black has no counterplay as the pawn on e5 is well supported and black is behind in space thanks to this advanced pawn on e5. h3 is simply met by g3 when there is no way for black to attack our king side. The queen is well placed here, putting pressure on h3. Meanwhile, as black plays rook c8, then a4 is a nice move, taking away the a4 square from black's bishop, and we gain space on the queen side by pushing our pawns. For example, if a6, then b5, gain space and limits the squares of black's bishop on d7. And if we get a position like this, then it's really difficult to play for black because our bishop is very active on this diagonal and the bishop on d7 is very poor. It's very passive on this square. So white is definitely for choice. So let's now go to the main line, which is short castle, with the idea to create counterplay by playing a quick f7, f5. It's probably black's best move here, I would imagine. And now we have a choice. We can play bishop d3 or we can play b4 followed by bishop d3. But I believe it shouldn't matter too much. So in this course, I recommend bishop d3. We can play b4 first or play b4 later. After bishop d3, black can play f5. This is probably its best move in order to try to close the king side and secure this d3, this b1 h7 diagonal. Black can try knight g6 here. But after castle, knight c6, attacking pawn e5. I like this move, queen h5. White has probably other moves, but this is the simplest because queen h5, it protects the e5 pawn, very important. And in addition, it kind of pins this knight on g6 to the defense of the h7 square. So now the knight on g6 can no longer move. If he plays queen c7, then we just reply rook e1, defending the pawn on e5, and black has no counterplay. For example, bishop d7, then knight bd2, developing our knight. Black cannot play knight f4 because of the mate. So if he plays bishop b6, then knight b3, taking control of the d4 square. Bishop e3 is coming next. And here black is hard pressed to find any counterplay, as white is ready to play bishop e3 next. And black cannot take on e5 because of the mate threat on h7. So yeah, black is suffering in a way. So after queen h5, bishop d7 is possible. And now we play knight bd2. And this is the easiest way to develop the knight because we move it to b3, from which it gains a tempo attacking bishop on c5. And the bishop has to retreat, so black loses time. And meanwhile, we take control of the crucial d4 square. So black should play here bishop e8. This is his best move because he wants to play f7, f6. He wants to play f7, f6, and to activate his bishop along this diagonal and attack the enemy queen on h5 at the same time. So white has to play accurately. b4 is possible. Knight b3 was also playable. But b4 kicks the black bishop away. After the bishop retreats, then we put a knight here, where it controls this square. Now, if black plays queen c7, then b5 deserves attention to force the black knight to retreat. Bishop d2 also is fine. Just developing our pieces. h6, rook a e1. And now we have the e5 square firmly under our control. For example, after f5, with the idea to take with the rook in case we take on f6. E takes f6 does not lead anywhere due to rook takes f6 as both the squares are well protected. But queen h3 is a nice good move, maintaining control over the position. Next we want to play queen g3. For instance, after a6, knight bd4, this position is unpleasant for black because the pawn on e6 is attacked, so he has no time to capture e5. Or on the other hand, if he takes on e5 right away, we actually have this very nice spin, bishop f4. And white regains the sacrifice pawn thanks to this spin. For example, here, queen g3, we win the battle for this diagonal. And if black plays knight f7, then he would lose the e6 pawn anyway. Meanwhile, if he tries giving a check, then after takes, we have this very powerful move, knight c5. And this works very well for white because the pawn on e6 is hanging. Bishop on f4 is vulnerable. For instance, if takes, king h1, now the bishop is in danger of getting trapped by g3. And in addition, e6 is hanging. And here white is clearly better as the complications are working really well for white. Knight e6 is a threat, the pawn on d5 is hanging. So black is under some danger. He can play e5 on move 21, but after takes, white grabs a pawn, and now we're actually a pawn up. And black doesn't have sufficient compensation for the pawn because c4 is coming, and black has a worse endgame at the moment. So after b4, bishop e7, knight b3, black is probably best advised to try to create counterplay with f6 right away because he really needs to fight for control over the e5 square. But we have some tactics here. After e takes f6, bishop takes f6. As you can see, the knight on g6 is still pinned because he cannot move as h7 would be open. And we have this nice move, knight g5. By attacking the h7 and e6 pawns, threatening mate, white forces the opponent to give up the bishop pair. So after takes, queen takes, we get the bishop pair and we get a slightly better endgame, thanks to these hanging pawns. For example, after h6, then we retreat, e5, threatening e4, then we play f3, and white has the slightly better endgame here, thanks to the bishop pair and the possibility to attack black's vulnerable central pawns. For example, here, now we're actually threatening to win a pawn by playing d5. So black plays rook f7. But in the game Ilyasov against Dard played in 2018, after e4 with the idea of play knight e5, White found this really strong move bishop e2 with a better endgame, because if he takes, bishop d5 actually wins for White thanks to this powerful pin along the f-file. Takes, and White wins. The game Black played knight e5, but he lost a pawn for insufficient compensation, and the endgame is just clearly better for White here thanks to the activity of the pieces. And Black was unable to get enough compensation for the pawn. So yeah, knight g6, we finished discussing this line. Knight g6 followed by queen h5, I believe is slightly better for White. Black can play f5 instead, and this probably is main line. We capture en passant, rook takes f6, and this line is very concrete because Black wants to create activity right away in the center. So I suggest queen h5. White puts the queen on a safer square away from this e5, e4 idea, and at the same time we attack this pawn and we provoke Black to create a weakening on his king side. For example, if he plays g6, queen h4, then now the squares are weak. And we're threatening bishop g5 actually. So Black is under some pressure. He can try the exchange sacrifice here, but I don't think it's enough for more than practical compensation. Because here after bishop h6, threatening queen f6, Black's king side is also quite shaky. And after knight c3, our f-pawn is doubled, but in many lines we're actually planning to just castle long. For instance, after knight e5, we castle long just in time. So this line is very concrete. But after takes, I don't think Black has enough compensation for the exchange. Rook e1 is a threat. And yeah, and another of our threat is opening up the h-file with h4. So I don't think Black has enough. For example, even after his best defense, bishop e7, queen d2, followed by rook e1, White is an exchange up, and we have a target on the e6 and d5 squares. So queen f7, bishop g5. Now we're just consolidating our position, and we have some initiative. Black has some compensation, but I don't think it's enough for equalizing. So after queen h5 on move 10, attacking the pawn on h7, Black wants to play h6, not g6, because g6 weakens the dark squares. Meanwhile, h6 keeps an eye on the g5 square. So Black plays h6, and this is his best move. We castle short, and now Black plays bishop d6, a very accurate move, in order to control the crucial e5 and f4 squares. So this line is quite concrete. It's probably okay for Black objectively, but he has to find some accurate moves. Knight bc6 is not very good here, because after b4, we gain tempi attacking Black's forces. And here bishop b2 attacks the rook, followed by b5. And yeah, if Black develops his knight on c6 too early, he always runs into some danger of this pawn advance, b4, b5, gaining time by attacking the Black knight. So Black plays bishop d6 first, and here I recommend the move. I mean, White has several choices here, and you can play c4, or you can play b4. Bishop d2 is my main recommendation. It's a nice try, because forces Black to defend accurately, and we just want to play bishop c3 next move. But I recommend you also check out the alternatives such as b4, because they have very similar ideas. After b4, black has to find the accurate move knight d7, and he has to play a few accurate moves, such as this. Then he sacrifices pawn, and now he wants to play knight f6. And black is doing okay in the complications because our queen is under some pressure. It's probably dynamically balanced. We can take on e5. But yeah, let's take a look first at bishop d2 with the idea of bishop c3. Now black has two choices of where he wants to develop this knight on b8. Knight b7 is the best move for black here. If knight bc6, this is also playable. Then we play bishop c3 attacking the rook. And here, black should probably play e5, and this is his best move. Because if he moves his rook, let's say he goes here, then after knight bd2, we have firm control over the e5 and d4 squares. And after rook e1, black is unable to equalize. For example, a5, rook a d1, and queen c7. Now we move our knight here with the idea of knight bd4, and the position remains complex, but we control the e5 square and we have pressure along the open e and d files. Meanwhile, if black plays rook f4 and move 13, then we kick the black rook away, and again knight bd2 followed by rook e1, maintaining control over the crucial squares on e5 and d4, and we get some pressure along the e file. For example, if black trades queens and after takes rook a d1, again we have control over these squares, and black is suffering slightly in the endgame because he cannot play knight g6, and his bishop on d7 is still quite passive. So after bishop c3, black should play e5, which is a good move. It sacrifices a pawn, but the idea is if when we grab the pawn, black plays d4 and we get some activity. Black gets some activity because he wants to play knight e5 next move. So in fact, white has to play bishop b4 here, because if you play bishop d2, then after knight e5, your queen on h5 runs under some attack. So after knight e5, b4, takes. Bishop b4 is an important move here, and the only move for white. White has to return the pawn, so otherwise he gets a strong attack starting with knight e5. And now here knight e5 is no longer very threatening because we can take on d6 and trade off one of black's aggressive pieces. So after bishop b4, black can regain the pawn either way. If he grabs our bishop with the knight, then after takes, then we play knight a3 because we cannot develop our knight here. On d2 as the square is attacked, the square is under attack by the bishop on b4, but we play knight a3 instead, activating our knight this way. And white has the bishop pair, but our knight gets to e5 very quickly, and the bishop on d3 is very stable. And here white has a slight initiative thanks to our active pieces and control over the e file. Play f4. So white is just slightly better here. Meanwhile, after bishop b4, if black takes, he's regained the pawn. But after bishop e4, which is very important move, black still has some problems because bishop on e4 is very active. I mean, black was threatening to grab our bishop, so we move our bishop here. And black has to play some accurate moves. And queen f8 is the most accurate move for him here, as he wants to play bishop f5. I mean, it's not so easy to find queen f8 over the board, I think, because the queen looks quite silly on f8. But now he wants to play bishop f5 and equalize. So here I suggest the paradoxical move queen d1, which looks really odd, but it takes advantage of moving the black queen here. So now we're threatening to capture this pawn on d4. And black has to play knight c6 to defend the pawn. And now white can consider playing actively with c3 in order to activate the knight with a slightly better game. Or alternatively, we can just play knight d2, fold by rook e1, and then we get this position that is very close to equal, but perhaps white can apply some pressure here by playing knight f3 next move with some pressure on the d-pawn. And also black cannot take on f2, so after knight f3 his rook becomes trapped. So black has a slightly inferior pawn structure with 3 pawn islands against 2. But yeah, probably close to equality nevertheless. So yeah, knight c6 followed by e5 is a serious option. Black can also play knight e7. Instead, the knight is more flexible here because it takes control of the f6 square and the c5 square. Bishop c3, and the black should play here rook f4 because the rook controls the squares along the 4th rank. Instead, if he plays rook f8, then after knight bd2, white is a little bit better. For example, if knight f6, we can grab this knight, and black gets the bishop pair, but in return we get solid control over the e5 square. And in this position, white is a little bit better thanks to the pressure along the e-file and the pressure on black's king side as well. If black plays knight c5 to hunt our bishop down, then actually we have this nice move bishop g6, which looks very odd, but it keeps control over the position because our bishop cannot actually be attacked from here. It's well supported, and our bishop on c3 exerts strong pressure. For example, after bishop d7, we kick the enemy knight back, then we play bishop e5, and in this case, white is a little better thanks to the active knight on e5. The game remains complex nonetheless. But rook f4 is probably stronger for black here, with the idea to cut off our queen. Then we play knight bd2, and black plays knight c5, again hunting down our light squared bishop. And now I suggest 2 moves. Bishop g6 is a good move, rescuing our bishop. So now if black takes then on bishop, then after queen g6, we have some pressure on the king side. Knight e5 on move 15 also forces black to defend very accurately, because we occupy this important e5 square, and after takes, we attack the rook, follow with queen e2, and after knight c6, we play f4, and we still have nice control over the dark squares here. If black plays d4, we can just play bishop b4, and he loses control over the e4 square. Black should play bishop d7 here. When after knight b3, white intends to solidify his grip on the dark squares by playing knight b4. And the black has to act quickly. He has to find now queen b6, followed by rook f8 to try to get enough counterplay. But I believe he still needs to defend very accurately. So after knight bd2, knight c5, bishop g6 is my main recommendation. For instance, if he plays queen c7, then after g3, forcing the black rook to go backwards, takes, rook f7. Again, we just play rook fe1, and we take control over the central dark squares. And we actually have to play rook fe1 here because black was already threatening to advance his e-pawn. But rook e1 prevents that, because if e5, now we can just take. So if black plays bishop d7, with the idea to double rooks, then we play knight e5, gaining a tempo attacking the black rook on f7. And after rook f6, queen g4, we still maintain control over the e5 square, and black has to play rook f5. Now I suggest takes, rook a d1, with a slight advantage for white. The position gets a bit murky, but after rook f8, we attack this knight away from c5. And now after knight a4, the pawn on e6 is hanging. So if black takes on f2, then we can take on e6, and follow that up with c4. And black is actually in deep trouble here. The lines are of course concrete, but nevertheless after takes, after takes, knight e4, black is in deep trouble. The complications work really well for white. So on move 15, bishop g6 a nice move. Black should probably play bishop d7 to try to get rid of this life squared bishop this way. Then we play g3, forcing the black rook to retreat. And now he has a choice where to go. Should he play rook f8 or should he take on g6? If he takes on g6, then after rook f7, d4. This position is very instructive. White has a small but useful advantage thanks to the control over the e5 square. And if black plays queen c7, then we can just play rook fe1. With the idea to play knight e5 next move. With a slightly better game. Meanwhile, if black retreats the rook with rook f8, then we kick the enemy knight away from its active square on c5. And after bishop e5, white's control over the e5 square seems to me to be quite attractive. For example, if he takes here, takes, again we have this outpost on e5, queen d3, and then c4 breaking up black's pawn chain. And white's advantage is not big, but it's definitely there. In the endgame, white has a better pawn structure. The pawn on e6 is isolated, and our knights are well placed on c4 and e5. And also we're not risking anything, we have consolidated our position as well. So after rook f8, we have nice control over the e5 square. If black tries this, then we have this extra resource c4, and this actually works well for white tactically, because we use the pressure of our queen along the 5th rank to get an advantage. And for example, after bishop e5, queen e5, the pawn on e6 is hanging. So if black takes on g6, then we take here, we check, and we remain up a pawn after the complications. So black plays queen d7 is his best move here, because he's threatening our bishop on g6. Now we retreat the bishop, maintaining strong pressure on this diagonal, and also keeping an eye on this knight on a4. Takes, then we play knight b4, attacking both b5 and e6. Knight c6, takes, and all these last few moves were quite forced. We're actually following the game Ilyasov against Sasek, played in 2018, and now we enter an endgame where white still has some pressure. For example, after rook f7, knight e4 is interesting here, with the idea to play knight d6. The game